Good morning. If you're in Australia or New Zealand, if you're anywhere else in the world, good afternoon or good evening. This is a sort of a different schedule than my usual schedule, which is on 1 p.m. Australian Eastern Standard Time on a Sunday, which is in North America, like on the day before, and in Europe, it's usually very early in the morning, or extremely early in the morning. Sometimes depends. So it's a different slot. This one, it's a public holiday in Hobart today. It's our Royal Hobart Regatta Day, and it's basically time when families get together and do have barbecues. Right after this, I'm off to a barbecue myself. Things of that sort. Usually, people. There was last night. There was the fireworks down on the waterfront, and there was a number of competitions between yachts and stuff like that, and the general sort of entertainment sort of things where the type of facilities are set up with all sorts of recreational activities for people of the greater Hobart area. So I decided, to pick today, for something different. I hope I'm going to get a bit of a crowd. There's only 3 watching currently, so which is surprising. Maybe it's not the best time slot. Maybe some of my Australian audience hasn't actually woken up. I know in WA it'd be about 6 o'clock in the morning, so that's quite early. And and people are probably in those states getting ready for off to work and other things like that. So it becomes a bit complicated and difficult for them. I can understand. I was yesterday not available, so I sort of decided to pick this time slot to see whether I could sort of grab in the sort of more North American, European type crowds in those sort of Sunday sort of evening and midday to mid-evening sort of time slots. So we'll see how it goes. So this is just a trial, a bit of something different. I'm thinking about maybe even a couple of hours earlier, and so it's a bit like that. Maybe it's something that I may adopt in the future. I'm not promising anything. See how this one goes, and we'll go from that. So it's one of those things. Go right ahead. There's no link. There's absolutely no link. It's all epidemiology. That's the person. It's the sort of Hungarian team that have got their own sort of ancestral type keto carnivore type approach. But theirs is a sort of a paleo approach. It's sort of paleo carnivore method. I think they're barking up the wrong tree in terms of because it's all based on epidemiology, and that's the problem that even our community and many people in our community are sort of seem to basically have this obsession with studies that have got very low odds ratios. The risk ratios are just piss poor. We're talking about here 13%, very, very low levels. I mean, I just give you an idea in terms of, and I think Bart's talked about this before, in terms of just basically getting to any significance of any sort. You're looking at orders of 5, 6 before you even consider sort of generating a hypothesis. And that's really important. To just generate a hypothesis, you sort of need those levels. It's too low. I mean, it's just statistical noise. Anything below less up to 100%, you know, in terms of epidemiology, is just statistical noise. It's nothing. And you have to understand how epidemiology is done. Something that, I mean, Bart's talked about the statistical side and all that, but he hasn't actually gone into some of the methodology that the institutions actually use. And this is really important as well. And I think, if he pointed this out, I mean, he's very much a statistics person, and he gets sort of caught up in all that, and it's sort of it sort of suits his high functioning autistic personality. But there's other factors there that are really important. What they actually use is they use a thing called the ORAC value. So what they do is they rate foods according to this so-called, beneficial, like, does it have phytochemicals? Does it have antioxidants? Obviously, plants have certain medicinal properties. In high doses, they're damaging. High doses, any medication will do you harm. But in low doses, it can actually have a hormetic effect. It can actually, have that. So what they do is they will take those plant compounds and all that, and so they will give a better rating to the plants. And they will take their own biases about cholesterol and LDL, even though these hypotheses have never been proven. They will use that to basically rate meat poorer. And even when they do all these little tricks trying to rate meat and dairy and all these products poorer, what they end up in the end is, failing to actually even show any significant effect. There is no significant effect. I mean, if basically milk was such a bogeyman, we would have had, prior to 100 years, we would have had massive amounts of cancer in the, from Europe right through to, from Eurasia right through, from west to east, because there's a lot of populations that are actually consuming a lot of milk. The Mongols, the Tartars, you go one population after the Indo-European, the original that expanded throughout that whole region, all these populations, the Maasai, 3.5 to 5.5 liters of milk a day on average. These people must be dropping like flies all over the world. It's not the situation. It's not the reality. And even when you actually pasteurize milk, all you're doing is you're reducing the amount of, sort of nutrients. So you will lose some of the vitamins and maybe some of the minerals. Primarily it's the vitamins, like the fat soluble vitamins, vitamin C, some of the B vitamins. That's what you're really losing from milk. The growth factors in milk, they're not even, they get broken down by our gut, but they're not even basically identical to human growth factors. So they're an irrelevancy. All you're basically getting is you're getting some fat, some glucose, and some protein. That's what you're getting, and a whole lot of water. So it's just a non-issue. I mean, epidemiology is just nonsense. You can't base anything on that. Now, if somebody's got leaky gut, if somebody's got reactivity to milk for whatever reason, no, you shouldn't basically be consuming milk. But there's a difference between somebody who's got leaky gut and a whole lot of health issues, and is reacting to a lot of things. And there's a complete difference between a population which is healthy and consuming milk. It's not the same. It's completely different. So it's pretty much a non-issue. See, again, what Palomedicina is doing is they're actually applying a therapeutic approach. Now, if somebody has a very high HOMA-IR, and is very insulin resistant, well, you really have to go zero. You literally have to go very low carbohydrate, and you have to really go put the person in a very ketotic state to reset a lot of things. But that's a small minority of severely sick people. Most people just getting rid of all the carbs and all that, switching to a carnivore diet, to an ancestral diet, usually actually fix themselves. Within a couple of months, usually everything gets sorted out. But there are people. I mean, Pim had a guy called Nick who's up in Finland, I think, and basically he was talking about how some people's insulin resistance is like intractable, like it's really hard to shift. Now, those sort of people, they need to basically really go low carb, really sort of do something about fixing up their health problems. And so they need to basically in order to become insulin sensitive, they need to go that extra mile. But that's not for everyone, and I think it's healthy actually cycling in and out of a catabolic and anabolic state. It's actually a healthy thing. You need to break down tissue and you need to rebuild new healthy tissue. You can't be in a catabolic state continuously. It's not a healthy thing. So, I think they're wrong if they're basically promoting that for the general public. If they're promoting it for people with, these sort of very insulin resistant type cases, yes, yeah, it's got its place. But that's about it. I mean, the majority of us should basically maintain, good, healthy functioning. Now, if you go into ketosis for a long time, your thyroid does get sort of, you use it less, so it sort of does get less down regulated. Remember, thyroid also function will always be slightly lower on a low carb diet, but you don't want it too low. As long as you're actually providing it with enough calories, your thyroid will stay in that nice little good zone, at that low normal type zone, which is where you want it. And the other thing is, you need to support it with specific nutrients. So you've got zinc, which is very important. You've got basically, for the conversion of T4 to T3, you need selenium. So most animal foods have these things, have selenium, have iodine, have basically zinc, have copper, have all these compounds and micronutrients that the body needs in order to basically for all these systems to function. As I said, all these little nano machines, all these proteins, this machinery inside us needs these micronutrients. It doesn't need massive amounts, but it needs a certain good quantity of those. And usually in most animal products, you will get really good nutrient dense bioavailable levels. So, that's where your focus needs to be primarily. What are my thoughts on over basic biological need of protein? Approximately maintain protein balance needs approximately 60 grams of protein. So what do you mean by 60 grams? Is that basically for somebody who's 70 kilos? Are we talking about? Look, I have a different. I see that most populations that are healthy, that are trying to basically, be strong and vibrant, you need more protein. And the older you get, you basically, there are a number of issues that actually happen after 40. Is your taurine synthesis goes down, and that's a problem. I mean, even basically in terms of liver function, that means gallstones and all sorts of issues. You need basically to break down those sort of things. You need taurine, and taurine synthesis goes down with age. So you really need to basically get more from the diet. You can get it from supplement. I mean, that's one thing that I actually do recommend. I've got. there's my taurine supplement from a local brand which makes a pharmaceutical grade. These are basically, choline. Everybody knows that I've got an issue with choline when I can't be bothered, and L-citrulline, which actually increases the production of L-arginine in the bloodstream and actually increases nitric oxide synthesis. So those are the sort of things. I'm 53, getting older, and I have. Sometimes I can't be bothered consuming a lot of liver or eggs or stuff like that. So my choline sort of is my cheat in a sense. So I don't have to basically, when I don't feel like. And those are the sort of things. That's, mine's more aminos. It's not I get my vitamins and minerals from the food. I don't need that sort of stuff. But, because of my past cardiovascular issues and all that, and I've got that MSM which is another sulfur amino acid type base to, for my glycocalyx in order to sulfonate my body. So those are the sort of things that I actually consider. And it's just because our soils are piss poor now. They don't have those similar nutrients. The sulfur content of soils is poor in a lot of countries around the world. And that's an issue because we're not getting enough sulfur in our diet. So that's an important, and the more meat you consume, you will get more sulfur, which is important. So anybody tells you that you shouldn't consume meat, God, or you should consume very small amounts and massive amounts of fat and all that, that's just ridiculous. That's nonsense. Even your levels aren't going to go very high in terms of your anabolic pathways. I mean, just having a steak on its own will actually increase insulin to 1.3. Some people can react a bit differently and go a bit higher, but that's about it. It's not nothing major. We need to get over this whole idea that that protein is an issue. Protein is an issue only in mixed macronutrients. When you stick a whole bunch of sugar in there and fructose and all that, which is what the standard sort of Western diet is, that's when you get into trouble. It's the Randall cycle. It's basically you're basically just overloading the system, and you're getting a situation where the body just goes, stop, I've had enough, and you end up with a whole lot of triglyceride and sugar in the bloodstream with nowhere to go, and eventually gets forced into storage, so, and if you run out of fat cells, things really go bad. So the whole idea, this sort of, yes, there is a place for therapeutic ketogenic diets for certain people, but for the majority of the population, no. If you take a look at most tribal societies, if you look at some of my past chats with Bart, I actually show, a number of tribal societies that were actually consuming, up to 4 grams per kilo body weight, so they were just putting down double what most carnivores do, and definitely 4 times what most Westerners consume nowadays. So it's not even an issue. People need to get over it in that regard. So, next one. Now, in mother's milk, you've also got growth factors. So those growth factors, there are receptors in the baby, and so that's why there are some bodybuilders out there that are actually getting girlfriends to try and get their milk. I know it's weird. There are some weirdos out there. Anyway, they have, as I said, that baby's milk is for the baby and no one else. So if you're getting it from another mammal, like from a cow or a horse or whatever, the milk, not an issue because different biology. So you're not going to get all those growth factors are not an issue because they, if if you go back, I did on the Mediterranean diet and a couple of others that I did with Bart. If you go and watch those, there's a list with all my chats with Bart on my channel, and you can actually go through those and actually see. And I actually go through about the milk and everything else, and about how it has very little even estrogen. It's a couple of nanograms where we produce about 40 odd thousand as men and 600 odd thousand as women. So, 53,000 as men. So it's a non-issue. It's just a beat up a lot of people. Now, in terms of deuterium, the time that it's the highest in milk is when cows are usually giving birth. So it will vary. It will go, but even milk, it's not that high. It's about 124 parts per million. So it's still at the, you have to be, the optimal level to be is at about 120. That's where you want to be. That's a sweet point. It's not too catabolic, not too anabolic. That's a sweet point. The lowest amount is in basically fish. They're in closer to the 100 odd. Lard, out of all the actual fats that of ruminants, lard is the lowest. So pig's fat is the lowest. Beef, all the others are around the 120 odd mark. And beef meat, for instance, is over is over 130. So the actual meat itself. But carbs are much higher. They're in the 150, 104, 40 to 155 mark. And water, is in Paleolithic time when things were colder, and there was, also there was less carbon. The actual level was actually much lower. So carbon plays a role in the amount of deuterium. So at that time in the water, for instance, it was between 135 to it varied to 140 odd or whatever. Now it's much higher. It's it's around the 150, 55. It can even go higher than that, depending on what the water source. Obviously, if it's alkaline water, it's even worse. So if you're drinking alkaline water, stop it. It's basically you're just killing off your mitochondria. So it's the same thing with coconut water, too high. But at the same time, these sort of foods depends on how much you consume of some of these foods, depends on what latitude you're on. So if you're close to the tropics and you're not using sunscreen, you're getting depletion from the sun, less of an issue. But if you're basically, let's say, in Finland, and you're not getting very much sun, especially in winter, and you're consuming some of these foods and not getting enough fat in there from animal sources to displace the water that you'll take in from cooking and whatever else you do, then you can potentially be in trouble because you're not depleting fast enough. It's one reason why my theory is why the Eskimos have that gene. It's primarily for that. The fractionation of the water is very low, is very high in deuterium. So they have to use that to basically cook their foods. So as a consequence, they're getting much higher deuterium. And I think this is where the mutation happened for this reason, because they would have just stuffed their nanomotors completely. So in order to prevent that, they had to basically reduce the ability to go into ketosis to use more fat as a substrate of energy. So as a consequence, they basically displace more, generating more metabolic water inside and displacing that deuterium out of their system, which you urinate out. So that's their method. You're close to the tropics, you don't need that method. UV will do the trick. So it really depends on a lot of things. But that's my hypothesis anyway about the Eskimos. If anybody can come up with a better idea to knock that one, go for it. I haven't heard anybody come up with any better ideas, but and I don't think they will. because that really is the fundamental reason. It's these latitude effects of deuterium that are the main issue. So don't get too wound up about if you've got foods that are that are lower, that are slightly above the 120 mark, as long as you've got solar energy and you've got enough fat in your diet, and I usually recommend 2 to 1 in terms of protein, which you end up, like 30% of your food or 30+% of your food coming from basically from protein, which and the rest coming from. So it is a type of low grade keto diet type thing. And sometimes you'll go a bit higher on the protein. That's fine. That's not an issue. That sort of pulsatile effect you want as well. So don't get too wound up in that regard. We need protein, and the older we get, we need more protein, and we need an amino transporter like taurine, because our synthesis drops. And if you want to become a decrepit, osteoporotic, person in your later years, well, go low protein and avoid something like taurine, and you'll be in trouble in a number of years. Now, my thoughts on A1 casein. Well, nobody really has come up with any idea how the mutation happened. And I mean, I postulated with a friend about the reason why it may have happened. It's sort of, but an adaptation to a changing climate and sort of the sort of hermetic sort of properties of casein 1. So that's it probably, it could maybe just BS on my side, so I wouldn't basically put any money on it. It's just a thought bubble. But again, as I said, casein gets denatured in your gut. I mean, I did say there's a peptide in that video when it was a chat I did with Bart that actually does can transport, but at the same time, it's so little. It's a non-issue. I mean, people have basically been consuming in Northern Europe. I think that Northern Europeans have less issues. It's more people outside Northern Europe that may be more sensitive to casein. And that's what I've actually found. Even a lady from Spain, she actually said that, when she consumes A2, she's got no problems, but when she consumes A1 milk, she's more reactive. I'm neither. So don't know. There are variations in genetics and adaptations, but Greeks have had a lot of dairy, as I've shown in one of those videos, for a very long time. We consume as much milk as the Swiss do, so we're very different to the Italians and the Spaniards and all that. I mean, we have a very strong tradition. I mean, anybody that's read the Iliad and, the Homeric epics will know quite clear that, cheese, yogurt and milk were a very big component of antiquity within the Greek world. So, non-issue for us. But, there are certain populations that can have. Usually, most people that have any reactivity to any proteins, it's usually because of leaky gut and a whole lot of other issues. And so some of the sensitivity to certain proteins is much higher, like in eggs and milk and a number of other things. So even in gluten, there is higher sensitivity. Obviously, wheat has changed quite a bit, and I've actually mentioned in the past about Zea bread, how it has about very little, like a tenth of the gluten, which is the ancestral bread of most of Europe, including Greece. It was actually banned in the early part of the 20th century for financial interests. But up until then, it was still being used, and it sort of has had a bit of a renaissance in Greece and coming back. But even the varieties that have been used in Europe are glyphosate free, and also they are, because a lot of people go to Europe and they try the bread and they go, oh, I'm not getting any reaction, obviously, because it doesn't have glyphosate and a whole lot of other shit in it. And it's usually just basically fermented. They do it overnight, and they basically just put salt in there. So the only beneficial type of bacteria actually grow in it. So it's less reactive in that regard. It's the issue is with breads in general. Most Southern Europeans don't consume a lot. It's the overconsumption which is the biggest problem in terms of glucose issues. But but the reactivity that most other people in North America, Australasia, and places like that get, or in parts of Western Europe get, is primarily because of these newfangled type and also underlying, sensitivities due to leaky gut and all sorts of other issues that people have because of emulsifiers in the food. That we're consuming a lot of packaged foods. These packaged foods have got emulsifiers. They break down, basically your gut barrier. So, if you're starting to consuming a lot of that sort of processed stuff, that's why I say anything in a box that comes out of a factory shouldn't be going down your mouth. Simple as that. If it's going down your mouth, you've only got yourself to blame, or the people that basically manipulated your brain. Well, it is slightly larger. I will do a video in the future about it and go into some detail about choline and all that, but it is much larger. Fundamentally, it doesn't matter what your diet you're on. You can be on a carnivore diet. If you're not getting enough choline in your diet, you can end up with fatty liver or mostly on the carnivore diet, it'll end up being a low-grade fatty liver. Not a large grade, but a low grade type liver, because you basically need choline to transport fat out of your system, your liver. You want to export via VLDL. You want to export all those triglycerides out of you, so they don't end up accumulating in your liver. You need choline. So really, fatty liver is a choline deficiency. Period. That's it. So whether you get it from eating eggs, liver, and meat, or whether you and seafood, especially one of the highest is like squid, very good. So if you're not getting it from these sort of sources, then you're basically putting yourself into some trouble. So that is pretty much the reality. And it's a big issue because a lot of people have these SNPs throughout Europe. They are big percentages, believe me. But I'll do something in the future that actually just shows that. It's one of the long list of things that I need to do to explain that. But yes, it is a problem for a lot of people. So that's another reason why I consume 4 to 6 eggs a day. And when I get sick and tired of consuming eggs, I'll switch to the supplement. That's my lazy option, So I can go through one of those supplements, even though it's only got 250 grams in it. I have a gram a day. If I don't get a gram a day from the diet, I'll have a gram of the supplement. Sometimes I just get sick and tired of eggs. It's just one of those things, you can't, or liver or things like that are high in choline. So, yeah, that's my go-to option. Look, there's a lot of look, the biggest issue with is also the amount of magnetic fields and the amount of energy that we're actually just adding to our environment. It's just exponentially being increased over and over. And what this has an effect is it has an effect on our mitochondria, those tight junctions being pulled apart. It has an effect on, a lot of cellular function and all that. It interacts because, remember, these also have light frequencies, and we've got melanopsin all over our skin and through our entire gastrointestinal sort of tract, right through from our mouth to our anus. There are melanopsin, there are sensors, light sensors. That's how basically we tune our food to our circadian rhythm. I mean, I've mentioned that to someone on this in a previous chat, that you need to eat within times of light in order to process that food. And if you're working as a shift worker, you don't eat at night. You fast right throughout. So if you go to sleep in the morning, you wake up in the midday, you eat then, and then when light starts going down and when the sun starts going down, you stop eating, and then you fast right through. Just use a bit of water. That's all you need. Some water, nothing more, so it's very important. I mean, the person who followed that protocol of mine lost a bit of weight, dropped a few kilos as well, and also feels much better. So one of my subscribers that basically mentioned it in last week's chat, I think it was. So you've got to be with you in circadian rhythm, and unfortunately, a lot of these countless EMFs, and because with 5G you're going to have multiple towers. It's not like one tower. You're going to have towers all over the bloody place. There's going to be so many magnetic fields that are basically going to be interfering. It's not the, I'll actually, I wasn't going to do this. Where have I got that bloody study? Now, look, I'll show it on Bart's thing. There's actually a study which actually shows the effect, and it's non-existent in terms of, when you look at, thermic effect and all these sort of things. Yeah, not less of an issue. It's more the spectrum of the electromagnetic field spectrum, and these magnetic fields and the light of those frequencies that are interacting with our melanopsin, creating these issues. And it varies between people. It's, we'll go into it in a deeper in next one of Bart's, which I'm invited next week to talk about a lot of this. So I won't go into any depth at this point, but it's an interesting area. But I think some of the stuff's a bit overblown and all that. And I think if you're on a ketotic diet and you're depleting deuterium properly and you've got good functional mitochondria and all that, it's less of an issue. It's going to be more of an issue for the general community that's, moving away from ancestral foods to this new type of kibble, add kibble and EMFs and all this sort of, all these other issues, people not earthing themselves. I mean, once upon a time, we earthed ourselves continuously. We don't. Everybody's wearing plastic soles on their feet, and so there's no connection with the earth, so we can't get those that beneficial effect of earthing. So what do you say and what do you do? It's just one of those things. All I can say to people is that get out, earth yourself. I try and do it at lunchtime when I'm at work. I go to St. David's Park and I lie down, or I actually just take my shoes off, my socks off, and and then go and wash them. I think I've mentioned this before, but you really need to do something like that in that regard. Yes, let's move on. Yeah, exactly. So this is another one about that I'm in Bart's camp about the main issue of high carbs and high fats, both of them inhibiting each other's uptake. Yep. This is part of insulin resistance. Overloading the mitochondria. I think I've mentioned also that what happens is because of the deuterium component, it actually can slow down those nanomotors. It's It has to do with the protein gradients. I mean, the body basically what it does is, you know, gets rid of the carbon by breathing it out. That's what you do. And really, it wants the protons and the electrons to basically, create metabolic water and generate. You need oxygen and protons to basically, the hydrogen to basically create water. So that's what the body is doing, creating metabolic water and creating a byproduct called ATP synthase, which the cell uses as energy, which is the shit of the mitochondria, as I, yes, inappropriately call it. But that's what it is. It's their byproduct of their own production of water. So, I mean, the Randall cycle is real, and you can see that it's a gradient. It's not basically on and off, it's a gradient. So the more sugar and fat combination increases, the worse it gets. The less of those energy macros you have, one or the other, so low fat or low sugar, either one will basically lower the gradient. So if you're basically, let's say, having a potato, for instance, your insulin is only going to be about, around about 4. But if you're basically, you pack in a whole lot of mixed macros and fructose and go to McDonald's and have this sort of buffet of sugar, fat, and on ad libitum, then you could potentially get anywhere from your 50 odd right up to 70 odd in terms of your insulin response. We're talking about something like a 60 order magnitude of just a steak. That's the difference. It's massive. So basically, and if you go back there, and also because of the type of fats that are used. Remember, you're using a type of fat which is just supercharging the actual, the inner mitochondrial membrane, and it's just really damaging to the body, in terms of the amount of reactive oxygen species that it just generates within the membrane itself. It's just, let alone it incorporates itself into the membrane, and it's piss poor. It's not like saturated fat, which is a much better building block. And you end up with all sorts of issues. So it's, I could go for hours and hours explaining all these sort of things, but we don't have that time, so I have to move on. But yes, I am in that camp, and really, but the difference is it's better to go low carb, low sugar, for a number of reasons. One, more sugar, more deuterium, more damage to your nanomotors. You'll age quicker, you'll basically become weaker and less energetic over time, and you'll suffer for it. Fruit is the worst of the carbohydrates, highest in deuterium. Just look at some of the fruitarians that are not in the tropics to deplete like freely, but are basically in places like Canada and places like that. What's happening to them? They're bedridden. That should tell you something, that it's an inappropriate diet. So yes, you can lose weight. These guys are skinny, they're very catabolic. You can lose weight, like on a very high fat, very low protein, low carb diet. You can lose a lot of weight on either one of them, but which is going to be healthier? That's what you need to ask yourself, which is going to deplete, create metabolic water and give you energy and all that, and health in the long run. There's a difference between the two, fundamental difference. So yes, both will have this low gradient of the Randall cycle, but one is, healthy and the other one isn't. So that's the difference between those two catabolic approaches. So the outside signaling role of deuterium may play, would it really not massive inhibition of cause notable damage? As I said before, you really need to be at that 120 mark. You don't want to be too low, too catabolic. I mean, it depends on whether you're loaded with neutrons, or not. Let me just sneeze. Bit of dust earlier, and so yeah. Look, if you stick to those sort of look the outside, it's within the amount of neutrons that are actually in different foods have different levels of inhibitory effect. So the body tries to get rid of those neutrons. It just tries to flush them out, but over a certain threshold, it can't, and then they start doing some damage to the nanomotors and everything else. So you want to be sticking to animal foods, and animal fats in particular, especially if you're away from the tropics. So that's where the focus should be. I've sort of lost my place. Oh, Bart's here as well. G'day, Bart. So other than the Inuit adaptation, lactase production persistence, do you know of any other interesting genetic adaptations? There's not really any. I mean, probably the one that's most interesting is the Han Chinese one with choline. Where 76% of them can endogenously produce choline to large amounts, and actually have, even on a high carbohydrate diet, have much lower homocysteine levels compared to other populations around the world. It's a fluke of just history, population that had a certain period of number of generations, very poor access to animal foods, and this sort of adaptation happened within that population. That's another reason why I say ignore Chinese homocysteine type studies, which all the vegetards use and point to, because they're irrelevant to the majority of the population around the world. Because even populations that do have some capacity to endogenously produce choline, it is much lower capacity than they have. So, yeah. Yeah. Cycle through these while I'm waiting for Jared to appear, because he said he was going to appear today. I've sent him a link, but still hasn't. Maybe something's come up with him. I don't know. Good. Hello. Will eating honey destroy me? Look, honey's got fructose, and I always ask people, where are you located on the planet? You know, if you're located close to the tropics, it's going to be less of an issue. Yes, it does have growth factors and it does have more deuterium in it. So should you be eating it? Probably not. Most people that are usually on my channel are not from the tropics, so I would say most likely not. Probably not a good idea. I'll just cycle through some of the comments that people are making. Yep, that's just another comment. So do I have any comment about how strongmen eat? Well, today's strongmen, they tend to basically do a steak, eggs, dairy, and rice type of diet. If you go back, to the earlier days before a lot of these sort of a lot of people, and also they use steroids and they use a lot of other things which people in the past didn't use. Some of the old traditionalists. I mean, some of the traditionalists. I mean, there was one guy there that was consuming like massive amounts of meat and eggs every day, and that was his diet. It was just eggs, steak and eggs. Pretty much. Um, had dairy sometimes, but that was pretty much it. And even he was in his 70s, and and he was still quite a strong fellow. I mean, he used to he actually died by lifting a big I can't remember whether it was a fridge or a washing machine, one of the two. Now these are heavy items, even for a young person, let alone a 70-year-old. And he was walking up the stairs and literally tripped over or something like that, and got crushed by the uh, by what he was carrying. So yeah, so I mean, I would look at those strong men because they were healthy, they were eating species appropriate food, and they were doing really well in that regard. I mean, how many calories a day you consume has to do with how much exercise you're doing, your size. This is one thing that I look at veterinary science is much more closer to how you should be feeding. Your macros and micros should be according to your size. That's how they feed animals. Not, they don't give them the same RDIs. They feed them according to their size. And that's what you should be doing. Or their energetics, one of the two. And that's really important. So you really need to send me an email, specifically about, you know, your body composition, stuff like that, and I'll give you an idea of how many calories you need. But at this that's a long chat. Otherwise, you'll have to surrender your Carnival card. Oh, he's even coming onto my channel and asking for cards. Oh. But you like sugar. Oh well, that's yeah. I mean, you have to ask yourself, are you able to deplete it? That deuterium in that sugar. Can you deplete it? If you can't deplete it, then yeah, it's not going to be good for you in the long run. So, you know, if you take a look at animals that have very low deuterium, actually one of the animals in terms of mammals that we're talking about, because that's where we can actually relate to, is basically look at the actual camels. You can't really see much difference in terms of aging between camels. They are a depleting deuterium machine, you know, and even the cactus that they eat is deuterium depleted, very low, in the low sort of hundreds. And they've and their hump is just full of fat, which is basically metabolic water they just produce from it. So and they're an environment that basically is a lot of UV that also depletes. So camels never get cancer. You know, I mean, you would have to take a camel away from to one, feed it inappropriate food, and the other thing, take it to Siberia or somewhere like that, where it's undercover, doesn't get any sunlight or whatever, to really possibly induce cancer in a camel. Yeah, I mean, there's an old Arab saying that you can never tell a camel when it's going to die in the desert. You can tell a horse because it gets thirsty and all that, but camels you never know. They just drop dead all of a sudden. Yeah, when cell division just ceases. But yeah, because they're a depleting deuterium machine. So sugar. If you want long life, stay away from sugar. It's simple as that. It's your choice. Like everyone, we've got a choice to basically eat certain foods or not eat certain foods. If we have too many indiscretions, we'll pay for them later on. If we have one or two here or there, probably not. Depends. It's not. Our bodies are every day depleting deuterium, every day sort of clearing up cellular debris or whatever at different gradients. It varies. I mean, if you're more catabolic, you're fasting and stuff like that, you're going to basically be clearing up more cellular debris. If you're less, you're always clearing up some cellular debris. But as you get older, your ability to repair the damage that's being caused by all sorts of manner of effects of your environment, food, chemicals in your environment, all these different things, the assaults on your body, stress, you know, all these other factors, become much more difficult. So you don't want to be overloading your body with more things to fix. The more things you have to fix, the more you're going to be, losing out in that game of repair and damage. The damage is going to be happening at a higher rate than you can actually repair. So you need to basically be mindful of those things. Yes, we all have indiscretions, and there's going to be birthday parties and all sorts of things, and certain unavoidable occasions where we're celebrating with other people. But try and keep it to a much lower level, if you want long life in particular, you know. So, how much of a problem do you consider cooking fatty fish is? I usually, it depends. Look, a fish actually, if the skin's on, if you get fish without the skin on, that means they remove the skin and all that sort of, which is fillets, as an example. I would only boil that. I wouldn't, and on a much lower temperature and stuff like that. The reason for that is because they've removed the astaxanthin. So the astaxanthin, which is on that on the skin side, that reddish stuff, that actually is a stabilizer for PUFA. It actually refreshes it can actually refresh those fatty acids, those PUFA fatty acids. It's what basically fish actually use to stabilize their PUFA, their omega 3s in their bodies. So it's a potent antioxidant, and if you're not having fish with the skin on, plus it's collagen as well you're getting, which is important, then it can be more problematic. So that's another reason why I don't buy fish from supermarkets on a regular basis or anything like that, or seafood in general. I usually go down to the waterfront in Hobart, and I usually buy from stuff that's been brought in by fishermen that day or that morning. And it's usually most of it's snap frozen on the boat and then brought in, and then thawed out and sold. So it depends. And I usually buy it that day, cook it that day, and that's about it. So that's how I treat fish in that regard. And I always get, fish with the skin on, always. And it's really important that you do that because you want that astaxanthin. Well, you could go and buy yourself a Hawaiian astaxanthin as well as a supplement when you're having fish or any sort of foods high in PUFA, but still, it's problematic, a lot of that sort of stuff. And then the quality, the sourcing of these supplements. I've got question marks in terms of aldehydes and stuff like that, and other pollutants, So, you know, get fish with its skin on is going to be much healthier for you, and um, and don't overcook it. Fish isn't meant to be overcooked. Um, that's how you're going to create more oxidative byproducts in the fish and going to damage. Because there's only a certain amount. So when you're cooking it, especially frying it, you're going to be losing far more astaxanthin and actually creating more damage to those PUFAs in the fish. So keep that in mind. So, it's not a good idea to fry continuously a lot of foods, let alone, if you're going to be frying anything, it should be in animal fats like people used to do in the past, especially lard, which has the lowest level of deuterium as well, even lower than tallow. So keep that in mind. Yes, you pay for them in the long run. I can't tell you what to eat. It's your body, in terms of your threshold of cheat meals and stuff like that. But I would say it's probably not a good idea to have too many cheat meals. You will pay for it in the long run, one way or another. So somebody's just asking whether Bart's heard from Thomas DeLaura. Probably another person gone into hiding because they've got too much to lose. I would suspect so. Yeah. And I mean, Bart, on the other hand, just told him, this is my opinion, this is my view, let's have a chat, So he was quite upfront and honest about it. He wasn't trying to, trap this person or basically bamboozle them or something like that, like some people do. But, obviously he probably looked at some of this, looked at some of Bart's work, looked at some of the information and realised, oh, I did a bit of a boo-boo here. The best thing would have been to say, look, I looked at this, I've re-looked at this research, and just basically dealt with it, because that's how we get misinformation out there. I mean, we all must make mistakes. We're only human, and sometimes it's just basically better to own up and say, yep, I sort of made a boo-boo there, and I mean, most reasonable people won't hold it against you. I mean, we all can sometimes say things, and I mean, I think I've said one or two things where I knew even before I said it that I was saying that it was wrong, but I said it without thinking, and then after, when I actually looked at and then there was another case where I thought I said something wrong, and then I actually looked at my own video stream, and then I looked at it and said, oh no, I did say the right thing, because I thought I said like what was it again? I'm trying to think about it. Oh yeah, it was on the quantity of something. I think it was, what was it? Can't remember. Anyway, and it was micrograms or milligrams, and I thought that I'd said milligrams, and I said, "Fuck, that's a high dose." And then I checked it back, and I go, "Oh no, I didn't say that. I said micrograms." Whew. Lucky, because I would have had to retract that and redo it, or basically, put something up to inform people. I mean, you can slip up. We're just human. He may have just slipped up on, or may have, sometimes you talk with people, they tell you something, and then you take it at face value, and you regurgitate it, but it's wrong information. So yeah, things like that get around, and it's best to just retract and say, look, yeah, we're always learning, and and I mean, you guys need to keep us honest as well, and basically, point things out, and get us to look at those things, and reassess our initial position or argument, because we're not always going to get, we're going to slip up somewhere. We're only human. So it depends on, so that's just a comment. Go further down. So what's my favorite cheese? So Bank Supreme, he's basically halloumi and paneer. So he loves not melting his cheese. What's mine? I would have to say brie. I actually like brie. It's so creamy. I like halloumi. Don't get me wrong. I enjoy halloumi. I'm Greek after all, so I enjoy halloumi. But I have to say brie. If you were to put halloumi and brie in front of me, I'd go for the brie. Yeah, I just love it, especially the really thick double cream type thing. Oh God, yes. Yeah, look, I've even got brie in my fridge. So I'll actually get one which has also a bit of the blue cheese type thing in it as well. That bacteria, that strain, which gives it a bit of a acquired taste, but it's nice. It's different than the usual. Is it bad to drink fresh lemon juice with sugar? You shouldn't be putting sugar in anything. And if you're trying to get basically vitamin C from lemon juice, well, you just inhibited that with so much sugar. It's like fruit juices, like orange juices and all that, So, yeah, I mean, those GLUT4 receptors, I mean, they can only take in so much sugar and so much. And if you just think logically, who are the ones who are actually getting this peripheral neuropathy, all these issues in their legs, get amputated legs and all that? It's people basically consuming a lot of sugar. It's diabetics. So the type of people nowadays that actually show up at a GP's, at a medical doctor's, clinic with these sort of symptoms of low grade scurvy or whatever, it's people that are consuming a lot of sugar, that are diabetics, and they just, they've got the inability to uptake not only sufficient sugar into the cell, but also vitamin C, because those GLUT4 receptors are actually part of the insulin resistant thing, are getting down regulated. So they are far more susceptible to scurvy, and so are people on very high sugar diets of any sort. Even, you hear stories out there of, vegans and all that, that are even consuming all these vegetables and still getting low-grade scurvy. So the reality is that, it's not a good thing. If you're going to have lemon juice, just have lemon juice. It's one thing. It's one thing that I occasionally have because I do like lemon, and I do like things that are sour rather than sweet. It's in my genetics, and I've always, certain things. And also, it's depleted in deuterium, lemon juice, so it's not going to harm me, as long as you're not eating the other parts. And most of the actual, like oxalates and most of the other stuff, are in the tissue, especially, so, and other issues like that. So, I mean, yeah, less of an issue. I mean, I just basically like sometimes a lemon and salt. So, because sometimes I'll have like salt water and stuff like that, and it can, like snake juice, and I'm going, ugh. And the only reason I get a bit of lemon and put in there is just to make it more palatable, the snake juice. So that's my sort of approach in the way I go about it. So yeah, but yeah, keep away from all sources of sugar. That just, you don't need them. I mean, try and bring down the level slowly, to desensitize yourself. And that's all you can do, try and work on it and try and move away. Go to Pim's. She's got a lot of, you know, videos on dealing with addictions, and she's pretty good at that. And, if you're really struggling, maybe do a consultancy with Pim. She could help you out, with some of the techniques and strategies of how to sort of desensitize yourself to sugar. That's another approach. As I said, it's a gradient for the Randall cycle. They're sort of fat, and the more fat and the more sugar you combine, the higher that sort of gradient goes. So as I said, just a simple steak will give you a 1.3, and that can just go up to, potentially as your insulin rises higher and higher and higher. And so does IGF-1. Because remember, before IGF-1 and insulin were separated in their roles within the body, originally in nature, insulin IGF-1 / IGF-1 were the same thing. So they go together. So the more one increases, so does the other in lockstep. And also mTOR. So mTOR is driven by higher levels of both of those. So the thing is, if you're eating inappropriate foods, you're going to be pushing up those sort of anabolic pathways. You're going to be pushing up, these sort of, these hormones, these nutrient sensing hormones that are basically just being pushed up and creating all sorts of havoc in your system. It's a gradient, from very low to, your McDonald's on all you can eat crap, potentially up to 70, so it's a gradient that just moves along that line. And so, the more you consume, the worse it gets. So just keep the levels low. Just try and keep the levels low. We don't want to be encouraging people to say, well, I can go this slightly like that, or I can have or you can eat potato like a potato day, because it's only going to go to 4, so it's going to be lower, and this is, I'll have a fruitarian day, catabolic fruitarian day or something like that. But why would you do it? It has all these other deleterious effects to your hormones, to your mitochondria in terms of deuterium. It's just one after another. It's just, very much not worth it. Very important for people to remember that. And the Randall cycle is a gradient. As the amount of fat and carbs go up, and where exactly on that gradient depends on a lot of factors, because you may have slightly more carbs or slightly more fat or whatever. There's a chart somewhere that I saw, but it's really just like a general outline. It doesn't, to go into specifics, if I have this amount, I'll have this, there's not enough detailed information out there for me to basically go to this and it'll give you, it's usually, you get this for these sort of foods, and then response, and then you'll basically, if you combine a certain amount of quantities, you'll get this response or that response. So, exactly, like a formula that'll actually give you a perfect sort of numbering system. I haven't seen anywhere. I'll take a look and see whether I can find something. I don't know whether Bart knows of any such. He may know because he's pretty much up to the statistical side of things and all that. So he may have, ask him next time he's on the live stream whether he has some sort of formula that he can post and or do a video on and actually explain exactly how you would measure things and how on that gradient it would basically increase based on this formula. So there must be something out there. I just haven't looked into it that to that level. So yep, that's a comment. Yep. You know, sort of it slows down I think I've said it slows down the nanomotors. You're slowing down the nanomotors basically, and it depends on the amount of food that you get, how much deuterium is in the food. The body has an ability to deplete a lot of it, so you don't get neutrons going in to the actual the complex 5, which is the nanomotor, to basically damage it. It rotates around and literally pulls in. It's like it's rotating at 9,000. What is it? I think it's 9,000 RPM. It's just goes like mad, and it's just pulling through these. It's basically put because the protons are going around between the inner and outer layer, and it's basically then adding a phosphate onto that. But sometimes you can get little neutrons that come through because you've got too much and the body just wasn't able to, the mitochondria weren't, they've got a certain level of efficiency. They can't get rid of all of them, and those come through, and as that rotates at high speed, you can just damage some of them, and that will mean it can either bust them completely so they don't work, or they can slow them down quite a bit. So yeah, it's something along those lines. I'll have to do a little video to actually just show it how it actually works. So what is the biological difference between someone who gains weight easily on high carb and high fat and someone who doesn't gain weight at all? So, I mean, I presume you're talking about, high carbs. Or, if you're very high, very low fat, it's going to be catabolic. And if you're very high fat, it's also going to be catabolic. You're not going to be gaining any weight at all. You should be losing weight unless you've got some major issues where your hormones are completely out of whack, your metabolic rate is very low, and there are a whole lot of other issues with your health. You don't have much muscle mass and all sorts of other issues, but and you're highly insulin resistant at that point, and it may take some time to basically heal you to get you to a point where things sort themselves out. But someone who doesn't gain weight at all is what I just described. There's also some genetics differences. Some people can actually put more muscle on, some people can't. So as much. I mean, I've got the genetics that actually predisposes me to a better sprinter and to somebody that can put on more muscles. So the sort of the myostatin type effect where you can just create more muscle tissue, where so you've got all these genetics as well that can vary between people. So it's a bit more complicated. But if you really want to gain weight, it's that Randall cycle gradient will help you gain weight. It depends what you're actually also doing, your physical activity, whether some of that is going to be directed and how you're actually feeding yourself. If you're, like as an example, having something like milk or whey before a workout, and then having a workout and absorbing some of that, some of those aminos, and also some of the, especially from whey, fast absorbing, they'll actually give you an insulin spike double that of pure glucose, so they'll absorb much faster. And if you're basically, you're doing a lot of physical training and all that, it has a completely different effect than somebody who's a couch potato sitting and jugging down a smoothie of whey. It's not the same. I wouldn't recommend it for somebody who's doing that, having a whey smoothie at home and watching TV. So there's going to be a lot of differences in what people's activity levels are, and also what combinations and when, and the timing as well between their activities. So it's a bit more complicated in that regard. So if you want some fast acting, things like whey, sort of milk products and stuff like that, you can actually buy from farmers like raw whey. You don't have to get like the regular supplements, the powders. You can actually get proper whey from farmers, and raw whey, and sometimes even whey with kefir in it. So you can combine that and you utilize that. So that's one option. The other, and then you would have something, about half an hour to an hour, 45 minutes probably after you've finished your workout, where your body has broken down tissue and needs to basically build that up, heal and build. And so, you look at something much slower, like, if you obviously, some people use a casein supplement, but, steak and eggs, which is the old traditional method, eggs will absorb much faster, but at the same time, you need a combination of both. It's probably a better idea. You need something to absorb a bit faster and something to absorb a bit slower, like steak and stuff like that. So, and only certain parts of the egg will absorb faster than other parts. And so you basically just want a bit more protein after that workout, and that's sort of where your focus should be. So I think I've pretty much covered it. I think that's the sort of thing that you wanted to find out in terms of, the athletic side than anything else. So comment. Okay. No, I haven't. Have I seen Cole Robinson new video? No, I haven't. What's it about? Let me know. Comparing oneself to a completely different creed of people is freaking hilarious. Another comment. She has to have her sugar. That's a personal choice. I mean, yeah. I mean, do you get out in the sun? Do you have plenty of, do you have it as a treat now and then only? It's, and if you're gonna, I mean, I have honey in my place. It's Manuka honey. It's a sort of, it has very high levels of sort of antioxidant type. Not anti. What is it called? I use it basically for colds. Like if I've got a sore throat or something like that, I'll use it like in a tea or something like that for a sore throat. But that's about it. Um, I don't sit around guzzling it down and all that sort of stuff, and so I mean, but for antioxidant purpose, you could take a vitamin C supplement, or you could just consume other foods that are higher in antioxidants. There are other options. Yeah, look, sweet tooth is a very hard thing. I really believe you should check out Pim's sort of work. It's probably the only thing that I could recommend. It's not an easy thing. I mean, my sister, basically, my younger sister, she uses xylitol. So she makes, when she's not, because she sort of swings between carnivore, low carb, keto. She does, yeah, she sort of rotates between the three. She's not consistent on one approach. But that's how she does it. And she uses xylitol. Um, and, that's how she makes her low carb type sweets or whatever, and it sort of works for her. Um, but she's quite physically active. She works in retail and sort of walks for hours, and so even small amounts of sugar get burned out of her. So it's probably less of an issue. Um, yeah, look, I, I have to say that you really need to, if you've got a big sugar addiction, or you really have a sweet tooth, you need to probably consult with Pim to try and get somebody to help you sort of manage that. I have a regular day job, and I just don't do consultancies. I don't have the time. So um, so you really need to see somebody like that can help you in that regard. I can eat so much more food just by adding a small amount of sugar. That is exactly true. You know, um, it's basically because what happens when you're consuming sugar is you're dehydrating yourself. So remember, the whole purpose of taking in food is to create energy and metabolic water. So really, what you're doing is you're taking in the food, you're stripping off the carbon, you're breathing the carbon out. You're breathing in oxygen that comes from the plants, and that oxygen, because you're giving them back the carbon, so that cycle between you and them, and you're taking in basically that oxygen, you're combining it with the hydrogen, and you're creating metabolic water. And the waste product of that process is basically ATP synthase. That the basically their junk, their waste product of producing metabolic water. So that's what you're doing. But when you're consuming sugar, you only create 0.44 mils for 1 gram of sugar. So you're actually dehydrating yourself. And so it may be a dehydration thing that makes you more hungry, wanting more in order to basically hydrate yourself. Yeah, it's the body's a funny sort of thing. The discussions of people talking about, is it hunger or is it dehydration? I mean, you can go on every single web page and all that, and there's so much talk about that it's this and that and whatever. Fundamentally, if you're hydrating yourself properly and getting energy, because your body basically, you know, we think of food in terms of food, but really the body actually at a subatomic level, is looking at food as protons, neutrons, as the oxygen molecule, the carbon molecule, these sort of simple little components, and it's mix and matching them in a different way, and and reconfiguring them and stuff like that, and doing all these biological processes with all these little nano machines in there, which we call enzymes and stuff like that, that basically just go around, building things and doing things and pulling things apart and everything else. And that's basically how our body works. We're not consuming food, we're consuming protons and electrons. That's what we're consuming, and oxygen, and we're, generating energy for this machine, one of the most complex machines on the planet. So that's what we're actually doing when we're consuming food. And so if we're consuming the incorrect type of food, our body will respond by saying, I want more because I'm not getting enough. So, that's what's happening. That's where I think sugar is less satiating and has that effect on so all these other senses have developed in our body based on what do the mitochondria and the cell want, and then all these other mechanisms, all these other hormones, ghrelin, all these other things that have actually emerged there are to manage those requirements, those basic requirements, and they are managed by managing those macros that we consume and how we get influenced in our brains and all that. We're told, go for this or go for that or whatever. We think we're in charge. No, it's this subconscious sort of, it's because the body's craving for certain things because it needs certain nutrients. And so, when we have inappropriate foods like sugar, we become more ravenous. You just have to take a look at the, veg tarts. I mean, Harley, Durian Rider, when he was with Bart, he was sitting there just eating continuously, sugar, more sugar. I need more sugar, it's just bloody madness. But that's, he was a slave to his needs, his biological needs, and that's why he was responding like that. But, eventually, like Tim Noakes, he'll end up, burning out his pancreas and being in a real tight mess. By that stage, even if he'll probably, he may, if he's not as ideologically crazy as Freely is, I don't think he is. He's more likely to shift towards us out of necessity and jettison that whole thing if it doesn't work for him, because he's a businessman. He thinks differently. He's not like Freely, he's just a fanatic. Is it a good idea to eat canned sardines? Depends on what the canning process was, especially. I actually avoid cans altogether. I only, most packaged stuff I avoid completely nowadays. So you're buying from Best Buy from Portugal. I have no idea how the canning industry works in Portugal, or Morocco, or basically any of these places, whether they're BPA free or or many other things, that contaminants that are potentially in the canning process. So yeah, look, if you can get fresh sardines, try and go for those. Sometimes you can actually get frozen snap frozen sardines. So, and that's wild caught snap frozen sardines is probably a better option for you rather than canned stuff. Because first of all, you don't know the water quality that's in there, which is one thing. Just because I say spring water, you never know. And also, high amounts of water is high in deuterium anyway. So the other thing is the oils, they're not going to be extra virgin olive oil. They're not going to be high quality stuff. It's going to be crap. It's, keep the cost down. We're talking about the food industry here. They've got no scruples whatsoever. They don't care. They just don't care at all. So yeah, I wouldn't actually say he's fake news. He's got some good stuff, like Dr. Berg and like many others. But, I mean, he tends to be a bit more sensational, tends to be pushing a lot of product, packaged products, which I sort of don't agree with. But, seems to be working for him financially. So I suspect that's part of it. But, I wouldn't say that all his information is good, but there's a lot of it that is good. And this is where the problem sometimes lies, because trying to work out what's good and what isn't can be an issue in itself. So yeah, but but even Dr. Bergs, he's starting to come across. He's starting to change. He's starting to shift. He's starting to now recommend that people that don't handle fiber well, they should be going over to a carnivore diet. That is very recent. He's been saying that, which was a bit of a shock to a lot of us in our community. But yeah, so I mean, I would have to say that there's things that I'm critical about him, Thomas. Like, he sometimes shows his body and goes, "Look, I've got all this loose skin and stuff like that, and whatever." And I go, "Well, why aren't you basically then promoting the importance of fat soluble vitamins?" I mean, everybody knows that I sort of lost, sort of, I don't have any of that sort of skin that, you know, and because I kept up my fat soluble vitamins, MK4, retinol, those sort of things, but also, balance those out with enough sun, or in winter with vitamin D3 supplement. So I'm saying, well, why aren't you promoting the fat soluble vitamins in a good, healthy, animal based diet? You know, he seems to be, there's a lot of powders, there's a lot of processed stuff that he promotes and uses. So, and then he talks about basically a lot about the collagen sort of powders and all that. And I'm going, well, what about the, those important fat soluble vitamins that regulate the collagen degrading enzymes? So he doesn't even go into any of that sort of stuff, because he's either selling a product, and in many cases also I find that he actually, a lot of the studies, there's a number of studies that he brings up and discusses on his, that are actually epidemiology or observational, or very poorly controlled studies or stuff like that. And he makes a big deal of all of that stuff, and I'm going, so yeah, I'm more in agreement with Bart. The science is piss poor. It is piss poor, honestly. I look at the ancestral side, and I always say to people, you show me, bones of people that don't have high levels. This is pre-agriculture, that don't have high levels of, nitrogen 15 isotopes, in their concentration, in their bones and their teeth and all that. Just show me. I'll basically say, fine, maybe they weren't as carnivorous as we first thought. But that's not the case. All the bones that actually have been looked at, especially the definitive study that was done by at the Max Planck Institute in Leipzig, Germany, it's quite clear. We were super and hyper carnivores, more carnivorous than many other carnivorous animals. So, and here's another one, a bit like Berg's, that promotes a lot of, pea proteins, like plant-based proteins, and, poor quality shit, and stuff like that. So that's where my criticism is. He has some good information, but he also is pushing a lot of plant-based crap as well. So yeah. Do I think that a vegetarian carnivore diet is possible for those people who don't want to kill animals? Actually, I do. I actually is one diet that I've actually tried to promote. I mean, I generally, as most people know, coming from having a Mediterranean Greek background, I promote a Mediterranean carnivore diet style based on my sort of heritage and my approaches to food and things that I ate as a youngster that I was fed, because my mother fed me brains and liver and offal of different sorts and crustaceans and all sorts of things. I mean, we have all sorts of dishes, and I'll actually show some videos of people. Actually, where is that? I think I've got. See if I still got a link to it. Let me just see. Not that one. Nope. No, I don't have a link to it. I'll have to find it. But pretty much, a lot of the sort of things that we eat snails in Greece. Yes, we eat snails. Not only the French, and a lot of other sort of seafoods and different types of varied dairy products and stuff like that. So it's a rich tapestry. So all I say is I'm just doing my original Greek Mediterranean diet, but all I've done is jettison the plant component. That's all I've done. I still eat my Greek style of carnivore diet, but I've just taken out all the components that don't need to be there, the fillers, the plants. I got rid of those. That's what I've done pretty much. Now, obviously you could, especially, I think if it was dairy and eggs, it wouldn't be as optimal in that regard. But if it combined some seafoods, I mean, it doesn't have to necessarily be fish. It can actually be a lot of the crustaceans, a lot of the things like mussels and things like shrimps and stuff like that. So it can be a lot of varied, and they're very rich in minerals, something which a lot of the veg tarts lack. So yes, you could actually do a vegetarian diet, a vegetarian carnivore diet. You could never do a vegan one, obviously, but you could do a vegetarian one in that regard, where you combine certain types of seafood with dairy and with eggs. Now, obviously, the proviso goes that the people doing that don't have any sensitivity to any one of those foods, because then you wouldn't be able to do it if you had sensitivities to those foods. So that's the only, but yeah, you could potentially do it. And I sort of try to promote that approach, which is a much healthier approach than plants. So it's like a halfway house between what we do and what the veg tarts do. So it's one way of actually, and I think we should promote that as a bridge to people that are more reasonable, because there are people out there that are more reasonable that we could basically coax in our direction with a species appropriate diet, but wasn't as, let's say, daunting for people that have still got these sort of issues of life and death and the cycle of life and death and the carbon cycle, the methane cycle, or they just don't get that. They have difficulty in sort of mentally feeling comfortable in that sort of state of mind. So that would be a better approach. And I think we would get better results in the long run. We would be able to pull people across, which were reasonable people, So, and pull them away, and also have something to counter some of the veg tart arguments out there in the community. So we could, where people got, they saw Cowspiracy or one of these sort of documentaries and sort of got brainwashed to some extent, or sort of like on the fence. And that's an option we can give them. So a vegetarian carnivore diet, and I think I've mentioned it before. It's not the first time, but thanks for bringing it up in a question. But that is something that I've sort of promoted to people as an option to shift in that regard. Even my sister, who the youngest one that had asthma for 25 years, and I sort of shifted to away from vegetarianism and healed her asthma after 10 months. But hers was primarily, there are different types of asthma. So let's get this quite clear. Her asthma was due to, she's got similar genetics to me, choline deficiency, basically. Not enough choline. I mean, for lung surfactant, you need choline and palmitate. You need saturated fat and choline, fundamental building blocks for all lung surfactant in the lungs. And so once she was able to, rebuild her lung surfactant with healthy saturated fat and choline, sufficient choline, she was basically able to get rid of a puffer and no longer have asthma, So, but then there is the other sort where you've got carbon 16 fatty acids that have been displaced by, PUFA, and that is lodged in there, and the storage of those nasty PUFAs from seed oils and from margarine, especially the margarine ones, which cause poor signaling, can take up to 4 to 6 years with a low dose vitamin E, to palm oil based, and I've mentioned that before, to displace that garbage. So it can take much longer to deal with that sort of asthma that's affected by that's from heavy PUFA consumption. So that'll take longer. So it depends on the type, but increasing your choline and your palmitate, your saturated fats in your diet, is the best way to go. And it's actually easy with these people, because remember, a lot of dairy has a lot of saturated fat, has far more saturated fat than meat, than tallow. So, getting a lot of, things like butter, ghee, cream, things like that into the diet will actually give the body a lot of stable saturated fat to basically use as building blocks, so so there are a number of strategies and a number of things that we can promote out there. We don't have to be rigid to a steak-based carnivore diet, because that's not going to win a lot of people over. I couldn't do it either. If I had to basically eat steak every day, I'd basically give up the diet. I'll be honest with you. My diet is varied. Basically, includes seafood, it includes dairy, and it includes eggs, poultry. It includes a vast array of different foods that I have every day. And it's actually healthier that way as well, because, if you've got any SNPs, any genetic, weaknesses here or there, vulnerabilities like choline and many other things, inability to convert those carotenoids where you need higher sources of retinol, so there's, because in animal foods you do have some carotenoids. If you can't convert them, you're a piss poor converter. You may need a bit more organ meats and stuff like that. So there are, horses for courses, so to speak. There are going to be differences, and we need not to be so rigid in our approach. Now, there are some people that can do very well on steaks for multiple decades, but one thing that I haven't seen anywhere in the literature or anywhere on the planet is a pure steak eating multiple generation society. All the societies consumed a number of varied food sources within the animal world. So even the Inuit, fish, They consumed fish, they consumed whales, they consumed seals, they consumed caribou, they consumed a lot of varied sources of animal foods because they do vary. I mean, even pork has a different composition to beef. So there's more niacin in certain, like for instance, lamb has more niacin compared to, and that's very important, niacin for your mitochondria, for NAD plus in your mitochondria. So, you know, so the thing is, for when we're talking about optimal eating, you need to get from a lot of different sources because you need to basically be able to furnish your body with a lot of different micronutrients from these different sources. And it's much healthier doing it that way, is my belief, long term and over multiple generations. So, I mean, you can't compare a steak with a potato. So somebody doing a potato diet, for instance, that's going to be really dangerous because basically that is piss poor. It's a single food and all that. A steak, on the other hand, may be a single food, but it does have a lot of nutrition, a lot of minerals, a lot of B vitamins, a lot of fat soluble vitamins and all that. So it's pretty good, but it's not what I would call optimal, in terms of providing, higher levels, especially for people that may have underlying issues as well, or SNPs. So, if you're coming from like Terry Walls, who basically had MS, I mean, she consumed a lot of organ meats because she was so depleted. So, and the problem is with a lot of the actual tests, we don't really know how depleted or problems that people have. So it's really hard to say. So we got to be very careful not to be promoting to people, healthy people that come from Northern Europe that don't have any real issues, underlying issues. Maybe a steak, an occasional bit of fish and stuff like that is fine for them, like what Bart does. But for a lot of other people, it may not be the case. So and then basically for somebody who's a Han Chinese, they just wouldn't even give a shit about organ meats because, for them, choline not an issue. So so I mean, they could probably do just a steak, a clean, clean steak diet, nothing else. So there's going to be a lot of variations out there, so we shouldn't be rigid in our approach, and we always should encourage people to experiment, try different things, see what works for you, see what you feel better doing. So try things, and if you're reacting to, let's say, you try dairy and you react to it, maybe you've still got some underlying gut issues, maybe not. If you've resolved all that, you don't have any issues, and you can actually consume a bit of plant and you don't get any reaction, but you get from the milk, maybe you have a lactose intolerance. Maybe you have some other issue like a casein issue. Hard to say. You have to test for these things. I wouldn't go out spending shitloads of money doing that sort of stuff. I think it's a waste of time. Just try the foods. If you react to them, give them up. Then after a number of months, try again to see whether it was just basically you're in the early stages of healing, to see whether you're still reacting to those things. And if you are, then you can say, okay, I may have a lactose intolerance, or I may have, a crustacean or an egg allergy of some sort. And so I have to find another source for some of those things, But I always, so it's going to vary. But I also recommend to people do genetic tests, do a 23andMe like I did, or something like that along those lines. Try and find out whether you have some of these vulnerabilities. That would actually clear up a lot of confusion that you may be having. It makes it a hell of a lot easier if you know you've got issues with choline like I have, or other issues. At least you know. I know I've got an MTHFR sort of SNP that causes high homocysteine levels in me, and also require far more B12 than other people. I have also issues with assimilation. So my ancestors must have been eating meat like there was no tomorrow. I know my grandfather, great grandfather, was a big meat eater, the one that lived to 107. So dairy and meat primarily. So basically, and raw milk has a lot, like 500 mils, half a litre will give you pretty much all your B12, but that has to be in raw milk, so not pasteurized, where a lot of the B vitamins are lost. But in raw milk, you will get quite a bit. So he was probably consuming a lot of dairy, from what my father tells me. So, you end up with, down regulating if you're getting, you're flooding your body with B12. And so now it means that my father is more vulnerable, because dad also had issues with B12, and he had to basically increase his meat consumption and stuff like that, and liver and meat consumption. And I basically had to sort of force him, because he wasn't a big meat eater. So he's sort of, and since he's been consuming more meat, he's been feeling much stronger, much better, and all that. He's 85 this year, so he's doing pretty well. So it's probably a bit long-winded, but a few things that had to be said about both our diet and other options that we can provide to people that we love, or people that are around us that aren't at that point to make that transition to just a steak diet. Some people are just not, and they may never be. So this, yes, is definitely a good option to promote to those sort of people. You are quite late. Hello, mate. A few others calling out. So what's Frank been saying? Has said it to bring him up, but Frank has said it can be done. You can have raw and fermented dairy, eggs, cover the fermented omega-3s and other nutrients, oysters, depending on the philosophy. Well, I mean, I sort of, like with Frank, we both sort of promote very much a rich type. I mean, I don't really see him consuming a lot of these sort of foods. He sort of, most of the time when he does his things, but that's because he's doing it for a North American audience, just steaks, where he's cooking on his barbecue. But he does promote these sort of things, and so do I. I've been talking about oysters, that I have oysters once a week and stuff like that down here. I'll have to do a video. I'll ask the guy down here there at Mako's whether he'll basically permit me to come on and actually take a video while he's sort of dealing with his oysters and stuff like that, just to see, what I'm getting. So I'll do something like that. But that's the sort of this is why it's been so hard for me with Frank sort of going a bit off the reservation with a lot of the other carnivores. It's been hard for me because I like Frank. He's a good friend. I view him as a friend, and I've tried to help him in the past and send him information, all sorts of things, and and been a sort of like a sounding board. I think he's a bit narky about me since I sent him my last email, being critical about his attitude towards Bart. I haven't heard back from him. I think he's pissed off with me. He's not even putting little love things or hearts against my comments anymore. He's ignoring me pretty much. So yeah, look, what can you do? What can you say? I would never disclose anything that I've communicated with him, because that's privacy. You have to respect other people's privacy in that regard. So don't ask me, because I would just basically tell you to go away on that regard, because that's just not appropriate. And I'm not into trying to foment more wars. We don't need wars. Our main adversaries are the vegetards and the food industry that are promoting their sort of kibble. So we got to be. That's where our focus needs to be. But look, I sort of, like Frank, I sort of believe in these sort of foods as well, because this is what traditional Greek, the Mediterranean, the Greek approach is. I'll actually, just for people's interest, just bear with me for a sec. I'll bring this up. Just share that for a sec. And there's Kokoretsi. Let's see if I can, just give me a sec, guys. This person talks about how to prepare kokoretsi. I didn't see you there, Jared. G'day, mate.
Hey, sorry, I messed up the start time that you had told me. I had
That's okay. It's okay. A bit of a mix-up. You just woken up or something, mate?
No, it's 8 o'clock at night here.
Is it? Okay.
Yeah, I just got home.
Yeah, good to have you on here. We were just talking about some of the different foods and approaches and all that. I just wanted to show people that the Greek kokoretsi, here are the organs, as people can see. I'm not going to go through the whole lot of it, just quickly show how this is a traditional approach. This is very popular in Greece. I mean, there are actual outlets that are called, which sell organ meats and only organ meats. And you go there, have a bit of ouzo, have maybe a bit of wine. Nowadays, even people have beer, obviously. It's not very as traditional in some regards, the beer component. But yeah, see, salt, shitloads of salt. People just pack in the salt into these organs, and pepper and salt, stuff like that. Mix it all up. You can see 12 to 1. It's shitloads of salt to pepper to get better taste. These are the sort of traditional approaches that I grew up. This is what my father used to do when I was a young kid, because we used to go slaughter animals. I mean, my first slaughter was basically when I was about either 7 or 8. and you'd bring back all the intestines and all that. You wash them out a couple of times. Dad used to do it about 4 or 5 times. He was a bit anal about it. You know. So when I say to people about, you know, carnivore and all that, I don't need people to tell me how to do it. We've been doing it for thousands of years, since antiquity, these sort of foods and all that sort of stuff. You know, the only difference that I've done is I've jettisoned all the plants out of the Mediterranean diet, and I just keep a Mediterranean carnivore diet with all these sort of foods. And I produce some of these foods myself sometimes, you know.
So this is just all the organs from one animal?
Yep.
Okay, so like the lung and kidney and
it's everything.
Liver, heart,
Everything. So that's coal. The kokoretsi is very much a Greek type. You know, there are a number of other organ type food preparations that other populations do around the world, which are different. The Greek style kokoretsi is specific to Greece. So what you've got this long metal spike, which you just load up all the meat pieces. As you can see, he just loads up all the different bit of heart, bit of liver, bit of kidney, bit of whatever, lung. So it's all the different organs. So you're getting all these different organs, which with all their different micronutrient profiles for your body. So, you know, lungs for lungs, liver for liver, heart for heart, you know, and all this. We'll move it along. So as you can see, once they've gone to that part, this is sort of you know, we call it mana. It's within the, you know, the sort of the gut and stomach. It's the gut type lining, and so we actually put that on the outside.
Interesting.
And then finally, we wrap the intestines around it. So you go long. So these are the intestines. So you go long and pull them right through. So here you'd have to put a few of those through long ways, and then you wrap it around as you're going up. So now you can see how he's wrapping it around. And going the other way.
What animal was this?
My father used to get me to do things like this because I was his household slave. You know, like kids are in all Greek families, you know. You get to do chores and plenty of chores.
That's a hell of a lot better than my dad ate. Wow. What animal were these organs from?
I'm not actually sure. It probably was either lamb or goat. See what he says? We don't want to actually tighten it up too much. We want it loose because we don't want to lose the fluids.
Right.
We don't want to dry the food out too much. So it's very important. It's lamb. Lamb and goat is quite popular in Greece. It's beef is popular in northern Greece and parts of the eastern parts of Greece. But lamb and goat, lamb in particular, is popular all over the country. I can understand why a lot of Greeks came to Australia and New Zealand for that reason. Plenty of lamb around. I'll actually put a link of this so people can actually watch it. And so they pretty much cook it over the coals. You can actually see it just. He wants to keep the the fluids in, so you don't lose any of the fluids.
And then slice it, right?
Yep, and there it is. Look how soft that is inside. It's crunchy on the outside and soft on the inside. It's beautiful. That's real Greek cuisine. Most people aren't aware of this sort of stuff.
No, I've never heard of this before. That's fascinating.
Yeah.
It's a far cry from canned offal.
Precisely. This is much nicer as well. It's really tasty, believe me. Oops. So I'll just get back to us. How are you, mate?
Oh, I'm okay. I'm glad to have some company this evening. Glad to be able to talk carnivore stuff. Sorry,
Great.
I wasn't here.
Oh, that's okay.
That's two streams in a row. I was late. I feel terrible. I just completely messed up your start time.
No, it doesn't matter. You know, we had plenty of things to chat with people, but it's the reason why Luke actually mentioned about Frank and some of the stuff that he actually talks about, and I said they have a very similar to the Italians to us. Slightly different. I mean, they do have pasta. They do have antipasto, which is a lot of the salamis and stuff like that. We have similar things, but not to the same level. For us, it's more dairy type products and fermented dairy products and stuff like that, rather than with the Italians, it's less of that. So it's a bit different in that tradition, but I don't know how long we're going to have today. I know that in about 20 odd minutes we're going to go offline anyway, because Bart's got his premiere thing with that Vegtard. So we're not going to be here for long. So we'll just go really quickly see the thing. What else? Okay, so hypothetically, if you talk a bit about concerns over deuterium on a small podcast, what are the main points to be aware? Well, the main points to be aware is to basically keep it within the 120 parts per million, which basically means that you don't want to be consuming high deuterium foods. You want to stay relatively in that safe zone of 120 parts per million. In terms of the best, tallow is slightly higher, like 120 odd. Lard is the lowest, which is pig's fat, which is what traditional societies like Greeks consumed before. The Sardinians still consume to this day lard. The Okinawans, pigs, lard is 116 parts per million, much lower. 100. So in that regard, is lard. If you're basically consuming some carbs, lard is probably the best type. Lard and fish are probably the best type of fats to consume because they have lower deuterium. So you balance out some of the higher levels in the sugars to basically bring it closer to that 120 mark, which is sort of that sweet zone in that regard. But then again, it has to do with how much exposure to the sun have you got to deplete. It's latitude dependent again. Colder climates like where Jared is in a much colder climate, he needs to basically pretty much stay away from all sugar, because basically he should be focusing on meats, because proteins also are much higher in deuterium as well. So anything with more carbons in it, in a sense, will have more. It'll be higher in the concentration of deuterium. So it's really, really important to realize that sugars and proteins are much higher. fat is very low. Unless it's, I mean, even seed oils, if you were to get a vegetable oil that was basically extra virgin, and it was clean, it hadn't been industrially processed. Any oil that gets industrially processed, they add more deuterium to it as a consequence. Like seed oils can have anywhere between 200 to 255 parts per million. So we're talking about, close to double what the optimal level would be. So that's the damaging effects of too many neutrons that the body can't deplete. It just can't. The mitochondria can't, get rid of that additional neutron load, and so some of it actually seeps through fumarate hydratase through complex 2 and actually comes through those nanomotors, complex and the complex 5 nanomotor. And when it comes through, it actually damages the rotor. So the rotor is actually spinning at, I think it's about 9,000 RPM. And, it's really spinning at a very high speed. And so, you get a few neutrons come through. They're much larger than the protons, and they will damage the rotor. I mean, somebody said, I noticed earlier, said it's a pump. No, it's a rotor. It's a rotor, not a pump, but a rotor. And I've been saying this for quite some time. I don't know why people keep on calling it a pump. It's not. It's a rotor. Even I noticed that even Bart after actually pointed out, no, you're wrong. It's not. To the person who said that, but it is a rotor. I've been saying it for quite some time. It rotates very rapidly. A pump is like, your calcium, potassium, sodium pump that's on the cell, that basically, has to be a certain gradient to basically allow one to, for that to open, but no, these are rotors. They rapidly rotate really fast. And they easily can be damaged if those subatomic particles that are coming in are much larger than the rotor can actually manage. So since neutrons are much larger, they can actually damage those rotors. Now, some that can come through can damage a bit. Too much will decimate them. And that's why those fruitarians that are living away from the tropics, they're not like freely, that can deplete with UV. They are like in Canada and having fruit, and they end up basically bedridden because they've damaged so many of their nanomotors, and they can't generate enough energy. They're stuffed, Being on a fruitarian diet in an environment where you can't deplete, and it's the reason why I said earlier my hypothesis about the Eskimos, that they cook with water which is high in deuterium, and so they need to downregulate the capacity to use ketones so they can use that extra fat to basically deplete, because when you're using more fat, which is low deuterium, you're depleting more of that metabolic water, which you're creating metabolic water, which is displacing the type of water which you urinate out, which is higher in deuterium. So that is my hypothesis. Nobody's come up with a better theory of why the Eskimos have that SNP, and I'm sticking to that. And if anybody can prove me wrong, fine, but nobody else has come up with a better idea. Everybody else comes up, Chris Masterjohn says, oh, maybe ketosis isn't a good idea. That's his solution. That's not a solution. That's because he doesn't understand deuterium and deuterium depletion. So that's, I mean, there's a lot of nonsense out there, but yes, in that regard. What else? We'll have to go through these really fast, Jared. Another one, Frank was asking about roids. Oh, don't know what was he?
I don't know that it's true. I wasn't familiar with what his Reddit handle was or anything like this, but I do
Okay.
know the individual who had the proof of that, and he doesn't have any reason to lie. And
Okay.
he gives plenty of other valid information about carnivore diet. He's one of the administrators of a major carnivore Discord server.
Okay. Yeah. Oh, look, I don't really know a lot about it. You know.
Yeah, I'm not going to go leveling accusations about it,
No. No.
but it does seem to
Yeah.
line up. The timing does. Although he was paranoid about Paul Saladino like a year ago, so I'm not sure if it's purely that. Although it could certainly be
Bit of
contributing to a
roid, you think?
pre-existing predisposition to paranoia. I don't know.
Look, I don't know either. You know. Who knows? I mean, the thing is, nobody knows what people do in their private lives. To be honest, you know, at least, you know, people like myself and people like Bart are honest, and we say, yeah, we have indiscretions. We're
Mhm.
honest and quite clear
Mhm.
about it, and we don't basically hide and all that. And you know, Bart gets on and says, I just, you know, had a shitload of pizza and that sort of stuff. And I just, you know, was going through a bit of mental anguish with a number of issues, you know, and it's probably financial because most people have financial problems, especially when you had an academic life where you had more income and stuff like that. Things have changed and you're sort of, you know, struggling, trying to get the other things working for you. That can be stressful. You know,
Mhm.
you can succumb to certain things. We're only human. I mean, I've got my indiscretions. I think I've pointed out that my ice cream indiscretion on the every Saturday when I go around to my sister's place. Thank God she's going to Western Australia. She's
Yeah.
moving.
Um, in Necrokitty's defense, though, for hypothesizing that, I will say that I mean Frank does market himself based on his appearance quite heavily, so
That's true.
he could
Yeah.
potentially be motivated to try to make sure that he looks like he's getting good results. I don't know. I don't personally think that he is on
I, I,
steroids.
I, I don't really think he is either. Honestly, because the thing is, it's only very recently that he's been building up himself.
Yeah.
And the thing is, there would have been no, if he was taking steroids, when he went off the reservation about quite a few months ago back before this, he would have been bulking up at the same time because
Yes,
just
exactly.
naturally the amount of meat that he's consuming and the anabolic effects. I mean, you can actually build muscle on pea protein with steroids. That's how effective it is. So, it just doesn't gel, in that regard. So I think there may be other indiscretions there, but that it just doesn't gel for me in that regard. But
Yeah, I agree.
yeah.
In reference to information.
Who knows? We'll cycle through a few of these until we get something interesting we can actually chat about.
Yeah, I will say that Frank is very ban happy with his YouTube streams. I used to participate in the comments quite a lot, just answering the frequently asked questions and sort of reducing the load on his ability to respond, or increasing his ability to respond. I mean, and I made the mistake of mentioning Dave Feldman on the same day that he had apparently had a spat on Twitter with Dave Feldman, and then I got
Oh
banned.
God.
So I emailed him and said, "Hey, I think there was a mistake," and he gave me a pretty curt response, but he did unban me. And then most recently, I made the mistake of mentioning Paul Saladino on his stream, not even favorably, just the name was there, and that's enough for him to shadow ban. So it doesn't matter how long you've been participating in his community; he's happy to kick you out of it.
Yes, yes. Look, there's more banter about. Look, he's an entertainer in that regard. He's a good kid. He loves his family. He does shitloads for his family.
Absolutely,
But
absolutely.
at the same time, yeah, I don't really know what's going through his head at all in that regard. Yeah, it's. Oh, look, I hope he comes back to our community, gets off that bandwagon of, because the thing is, he's actually starting to lose a bit of support as well.
I think he's undermining his own credibility
Yeah,
when
exactly.
when every single person that isn't him is accused of these nefarious dealings.
Mm-hmm. Look,
Every successive claim that he makes that way is less credible.
it becomes less credible. I mean, everybody's a shill. Everybody. I mean, that's just nonsense.
Right.
I mean, we have to be serious people. I mean, most people, like Sean Baker, for instance, he's a doctor. He's gone through the ringer with a lot of things. I mean, I don't necessarily, subscribe to everything every carnivore says, and I've got a different approach. My approach is a sort of a Mediterranean carnivore approach. That means jettisoning all the other plants, but these sort of things, the real Mediterranean stuff. I've, in my chats with Bart, I've actually discussed these things and shown a few things, but I will show more Greek style animal-based foods that we consume and stuff like that, so people can get an idea. There's another guy from I'm not sure which part of Greece he is. He seems to be from one of the islands, but I'm not sure. But I'll check that out. But he actually consumes a lot of snails. Does a lot of snail dishes and stuff like that, because a lot of these varied foods, animal foods, exist within that part of the world. Now, I know Frank's been promoting some of this sort of stuff here and there and whatever as something of his own. But the thing is, I sort of turn around and I go, I don't say much, but I say, well, hold on, mate. We Greeks have been doing this for thousands of years, since antiquity. It's not yours. You Italians learn it from us. And on top of that, I suspect if he checks his genetics, he comes from the south. Most of the southerners were basically colonial Greeks who converted to Catholicism under duress in the Middle Ages, and and basically abandoned their both orthodoxy and their language. There are still villages there that still speak the ancient Greek dialects, but not many as there used to be in southern Italy. But a lot of them, basically southern Italians, they usually say, because a lot of them immigrated to Australia and areas like that, they say una razza, una faccia, the same race, the same face. There's a bit of truth in that, because a lot of Greek colonial colonies were in southern Italy, from antiquity. So a lot of the foods that they consume in that region are very similar to what we consume in Greece. So it's a very similar diet. And some of those foods, I mean, Frank's aware of them and promotes them, and good for him, that he promotes a much richer tapestry of carnivory. But the tapestry is even richer, as I've just shown today. It's far richer than just that sort of stuff. There's even Bobby's perspective. He's actually shown some of his, sort of Slavic traditional foods and all that. Apparently he's got a bit of Greek in him as well. He checked his genetics. I said to him, welcome to the family. He didn't comment much about it. But yes, and some Italian genes that he thought, and I said most of those are from southern Italy, and they are Greek colonial. Because I've got some of those as well. Because most Greeks have, but because 23andMe subscribes, and most of their subscribers are Italians from the south, they put them down as Italian genes, but they're not, because they found it amongst all Greeks as well. So I'm going, 23andMe have got it wrong there. So because when I actually add that, my genes go from 80 Greek right up to into the sort of the mid 90s. So the thing is, yeah, but that's 23andMe. They don't get everything ancestral wise correct.
No. There's an interesting story from CBC News, actually, the national news in Canada, where two identical twins tested out some different genetic services that way, and they got different results.
Yeah, exactly.
Not like world
difference, but minor results. Yeah, and it's because they subscribe. It depends on their subscribers. The people where they come from and stuff like that. So yeah, So Necrokitty's mentioning about sea snails, mild and delicate.
I've never tried them.
I've actually tried some sea snails, but boiled, like in a soup type thing. And I prefer, if I'm going to have snails, I prefer them in a soup rather than either souped or baked, like, over, like putting them over coal or something like that. So that's sort of a bit like a cucurezzi, that sort of style. Any problem is you need like those little tiny forks to literally bring it out, because the shell hardens a bit and stuff like that. Right. So it's the same thing we use for like desserts, the little sort of fork type things. So you can use those. Some of when you boil them and all that, and you take them out, you can actually sort of suck it out. It's much easier to suck it out because it's softer. It doesn't sort of solidify in there. It retains a lot of moisture, so it'll suck out much easier. So, I mean, there are different foods of that sort, and I think I'd say to people, make your food interesting. Don't just stick to certain foods. There's a tapestry of rich diets out there that we can actually do. Any last comments, mate? Because I don't know whether Bart's come on yet or not.
Last comments? No, other than that, we'll have to do this again, and I will be there at the start.
Sounds good. Well, thanks for tuning up. Better late than never.
Oh man, that's, like I said, I feel badly about that. That's
okay.
My own fault.
Look, we're all, we've got our family responsibilities and other things that come up and whatever else.
I just completely messed up. That you had emailed me at like 20 after 7 in the morning my time, and you said in just under 11 hours, and for some reason my brain went, okay, just under 13 hours. That's 8 o'clock.
Yep.
And you meant 6 o'clock.
Yeah. Oh, look, that's fine. I mean, I use a what is it? I'll bring the app up. It sort of tells me the time, if I can find it.
Thank you, Shell F. I appreciate your forgiveness.
So this is wrong one. I'll have to find it. I'll email it to you. It's just basically you can actually check the time in different time zones and all that, different cities and stuff like that. I used it basically to work out, would this be a more appropriate time slot? I haven't made up my mind yet. It's probably easier for people like you in North America and stuff like that. So, I'm thinking about maybe I get up even earlier, which the only problem with that is it's really hard then I lose my Australasian crowd.
Yeah.
Which is, it's sort of or whether to do two shorter ones. Look, can people just leave comments and let me know whether they like this time slot, and I can actually include and possibly do two smaller, like a half hour or a 2 hour one, and do one on Sunday, or potentially even do something like on a Saturday morning, which would then be sort of an evening on a Friday. I don't know how that would work, whether that would, to most people, like
you stream on Friday evening, and then Pim usually does hers Saturday afternoon in my time zone, and then Bart's would be Saturday evening. That's
right. And then I used to do mine even later, which really just makes it very hard for people. And that's why I'm thinking about maybe doing a Saturday in Australasia in the morning, and then basically would mean that it would be Friday night in North America and stuff like that. So that may work much better in that regard, because then it just ropes in a bit more people and all that. So yeah, I'll have to play around with that and see how that actually works out between this stream and the next one, because I noticed the previous one that I had more people watching compared to this one.
Mm-hmm.
So I would say that there were certain people in Europe and in North America that were keen to stay up very late. So yeah,
it was a little bit late finishing up there the last time that I did it with you, where I think it was like 1 o'clock my time when we stopped.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
maybe premiere is live.
Okay, we better go. Anyway, thanks, mate, for being on. Have a nice evening, and thanks, guys. We're all going to switch over to check out what Uncle Bart has to tell us for today. Anything interesting, hopefully, with some of the veg sards, 1 or 2. Anyway, see you, mate. See you, guys.
Thanks for having me. We'll do it again.
And after Bart's, I'm off to a barbecue for our Royal Hobart Regatta Day special. So
enjoy that.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. I said to a mate of mine, because I actually took him the meat around yesterday, and I said, that big steak, he said, I'm going to hide it because I know your sister's going to go, yeah, you hide it, and we'll cook it after when I get there. Anyway, see you, mate. Thanks for being on. Take care.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks, everybody, for attending. See yous. Have a nice day.